Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dario from NEXT Pharma Summit, and it's extreme great pleasure and honor to organize today's webinar in partnership with Janssen with an interesting title, Connecting the Digital Dots to Create a Better Outcomes for All. I believe the particular title is quite intriguing because we speak about a quite wide angle of different stakeholders, of definitely times which are digital these days, and great honor and pleasure to welcome two extraordinary speakers from Janssen. So first of all, I would like to say hi to Maria Rath, the Vice President, Customer and Digital Strategy for the EMEA region at Janssen. Hi Maria, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Daria. Thanks for having us here for this discussion.
And Martin Price, the Vice President, Health Economics, Market Access and Reimbursement for the EMEA region from Janssen as well. Hi Martin, how are you?
Hi Dario, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Very well. And we start with our proactive discussion with our first question, which is let's start with the elephant in the room, which is obviously COVID. And we all know that COVID has impacted everything and everyone. What have been the particular effects in your areas of the business, Martin?
Yeah, okay, I'll kick this off. I mean, clearly, it's been a year like no other, personally and professionally. So it's been about adjustment. I think that's the key word, and I've been particularly impressed, I think, with the way that the people I work with have shown a lot of agility in adapting to this new way of working. I think it's fair to say that that we sort of looked at it in two ways, this whole situation. A more immediate issue, which I think was how are we going to keep the business moving in 2020? What is going to be the most immediate impact today? And then a more kind of long-term focus. So what will the pandemic ultimately mean for healthcare delivery in our region? So, you know, we've seen various effects here. I think in the shorter term, we've seen sort of two dynamics, I would say. First of all, yes, we've seen some delays in the way that countries are going through their reimbursement and pricing processes. But equally, it's driven some opportunities as well. And I think particularly some of the sort of the ways in which the system values products has changed a bit. So, for example, products that can be delivered outside of a hospital setting suddenly become more attractive in a pandemic period. So oral treatments over IV infusions or subcutaneous formulations over IV infusions. Equally, I think medicines with a better and more predictable toxicity profile so that we don't have to worry so much about managing all of the other consequences of treatment. So I think it's created some opportunities as well as threats. In the longer term, the way we're looking at it is we think there's going to be more pressure on budgets, that's for sure. And we think we need to avoid short-term cost containment mechanisms and look to kind of value-based healthcare principles as a way to get us out of this current crisis. So focusing on the holy trinity, if you like, of quality, cost, and patient outcomes as a way to think about guiding treatment decisions in the future.
Thank you, Martin. Maria, same question for you.
Yeah, certainly. So I would say, more generally speaking, it didn't only impact the way we do the business or the way we work, but it also have impacted all of us in some sorts of way in our personal life. And I, you know, thinking about having to work from home while taking care of our families, but also the fact that we were heavy travelers in the past, and now we get into those restrictions and lockdown periods. But other than that, if I shift very quickly as to what we have seen on the market, and in particular in pharma, where you might argue that we are like behind the consumer businesses or e-commerce, we have seen a huge acceleration in digital adoption. And there has been a recent McKinsey stat that estimates actually that in terms of digital and technological acceleration, we have leaped 5 years forward in about 8 weeks. And to me, I also think about the change management, which is very essential in digital transformation. And I see that we have condensed a few years of change management in about a few months. So there has been a much more demand about transforming our capabilities, our go-to-market model being future-proof and more digitally enhanced. And this has definitely required from my team to shift a little bit of the focus. But I think luckily in EMEA, we have a very robust strategy where we were already planning to take the company and the way we engage into the next level. And I think it really nicely aligned with some of the efforts that got accelerated by COVID.
Thank you, Maria. Very nice insights. Next question, has your work become more difficult in a remote virtual environment? Let's start this time once again with you, Martin.
Yeah, I think as Maria said, we made tremendous leaps forward in digital technology in a very short space of time, and I was personally surprised how effective we could be through this virtual environment. But I think that we do miss those opportunities to engage face to face, to have those in-person meetings. Where I see it most personally is perhaps where there are quite complex strategic challenges that really are much better dealt with if you're all sat together, if you can kind of, work together around a flip chart or just get your heads together. It's much more difficult to do that using technology. The other thing, of course, is I think particularly in the early days, access to customers, from my perspective, payers and reimbursement authorities, was a little bit more difficult. But I think we're starting to see more of a return to business as usual now. And we've seen similar digital adoption with these external agencies as well. So I think overall it's been manageable, but I do think that we're suffering a little bit in terms of dealing with more complex issues, and we need to find a way to ideally, once we're vaccinated, get back to some normality. I think we will keep some of the good things from this period. So I think more virtual working, more flexible working will become more normal, but we can't replace face-to-face interactions entirely.
Thank you, Martin. Maria, same question for you.
Yeah, maybe to build a little bit on the point that Martin mentioned, in engaging with healthcare professionals, definitely this wasn't the best moment, I would say, to shift everything completely from face-to-face into virtual, because like Martin mentioned, we have missed some of these informal opportunities to actually engage with our stakeholders. And as we found ourselves in that situation, we needed obviously to orchestrate the omni-channel approach. Like, how do we embrace this virtual environment, and how do we continue to build those relationships with our customers? And now, I mean, what really at the end of the day matters is that you're gonna get with those formal interactions that needs to be planned in a virtual environment, only limited time, which was always the case, but now you have to do it in the constraints of being very virtual, which means that we need to really owe this engagement. We really need to bring in relevant content, relevant insights, relevant scientific information. And that's obviously an extra effort that we all have to put in place next to managing virtually those interactions as well. So I think it has put on us some additional challenges, but it opened a huge set of opportunities for us to leverage and to actually accelerate into the new normal.
Definitely, very interesting insights. Next question, and let's start this time with you, Maria. This is that, so in this rapidly changing environment, what are the trends and challenges and imperatives as you focus on creating better outcomes for patients? Because we all know it's all about the patient.
Yeah, and I'm sure that Martin will agree with me, but our role, in the industry goes beyond the medicine that we provide. And we need to start thinking of creating meaningful experience and meaningful interventions that account for the entire patient journey end to end, and really not looking at it in piecemeal, but thinking holistically about what makes this experience the best experience, obviously by putting the patients on the right treatment at the right time. So traditionally, we would do that, as I said, through our medicine. But increasingly, we start looking at, okay, how can we leverage data science and digital technologies, for example, to help patients understand and manage their diseases? And it's quite frankly, it's a very important point. It's in this time of COVID, actually, we pressure tested it because patients could not go to care, and we needed to bring care to patients. And so as a few examples that pops on my mind, I look at solutions, digital health solutions that we were building or partnering with external, through external partnerships to actually provide patients with tools to track their condition over time. And not just that, but provide that data back to physicians who can actually look at insights that are generated through those platforms to make timely intervention, tailor a patient experience as such, or even adjust the whole treatment pathway, which at the end of the day, if we talk patients and outcomes, this obviously with the intention to provide better outcomes for patients. And we also took a look at cancer care, which is in essence is very much focused on treating the disease itself. But we, often we undermine, I would say, the psychological impact of the diagnosis, or for a patient being diagnosed with cancer. And what we try to do is we try to think of how can we leverage our internal mental health expertise actually to provide that additional supports to patients. So important that we think about along the patient journey, and we think about leveraging capabilities either internally or even with the increasing rise of the digital technologies so that we can support our patients better.
Thank you, Maria. Martin?
Yeah, I fully agree with what Maria was saying. And I think if you look at our complementary roles within the company, I'm seeing the role of my team and the teams I work with across the region in terms of making sure that patients can get access to our medicines, and then Maria and her team and our commercial colleagues to take over at that point and think about how best we can support patients once they've gained access. So for me, I think to add to everything that Maria has said, I think one of the key trends that we've seen lately, which again is accelerating, I think, is COVID has shown us the need for real-world evidence to be more quickly available, better connected, and easier to analyze. And I think I would have never imagined a sort of time in history where the general public would be comfortable looking at graphs of infection rates and R rates, etc. But we've increased, I think, our statistical and data literacy as a society. And so this creates, I think, an opportunity for us to ensure that we learn from this and that we generate better, more timely patient data, so it aligns very much to what Maria was saying, and that we build these insights and this data into our access and reimbursement decisions much more broadly than we do today. We rely a lot on clinical trial data, but I think the current situation has shown us the true value of real world evidence, and we have to find a way to make sure that this is much more part of the access decisions that we see within the European region.
Thank you, Martin. I would just like to encourage our audience, if you have any questions, you can raise your hand and put a question in the question bar, and we will take some of the most interesting questions and ask them towards Martin and Maria. But let's move forward to the next question, and starting once again with you, Maria, which is thinking about how healthcare will continue to evolve. How do you see big data playing a part in this?
Yeah, and just like Martin said, I think, you know, real world data and real world evidence is maybe one of the last underused fields in healthcare in general. It's integral to actually tracking health outcome. So there has been maybe some skepticism in the past about, okay, yes, we have seen the big data generated, but how can I be sure of the quality of that? So, but as we see the quality of some of the analytics tool emerging and actually improving, we believe that we have a strong base of evidence to start making some of these clinical decisions and actually accelerating some of the work. So, you know, there are examples where Janssen has been engaging in multiple projects such as Honor, and I'm sure that Martin can talk more about that, which is our federated network for hematology across Europe. So I would say it's a main federated model for real world data that can be leveraged for research, key research questions across the region, which will accelerate a lot of some outcomes-based analytics and studies. And I would say that Janssen is also leading in the European, for example, the European Health Data and Evidence Network project, which we seek to harmonize around 100 million electronic medical records, which also allows us to create a large-scale federated network for real-world data research in Europe. And it's not a silo effort, or it's not an effort that we only do or we only lead. It has a consortium of a few partners, patient associations is involved. It spans across 16 countries in Europe. So what we see is that, you know, with those projects, we're actually helping to build trust among the physicians in those types of solutions that are built on leveraging real-world data and big data as such, so that the next generation tools, for example, on-demand databases or triggered alerts in specific areas, and we see that, for example, in some of the rare disease areas where we have experience, that can allow for the physicians to only focus and to continue to focus, I would say, on their patients, making sure that they get the right treatment and to strive for the better outcome. And I would say, if I want to link it to the digital technologies, when we look at building digital health solutions, we definitely focus a lot on insights generation or real world data generation plan. And the ultimate objective for that is to demonstrate the benefits to patients and to the broader healthcare system. So we look at, for example, you know, some of the, it's tailored to the patient's needs, of course, across the pathway, but we look at some primary objectives like, okay, are we optimizing the healthcare resource use? Are we looking to improve quality of life? Do we want to make sure that we have timely intervention for physicians? So we really put, you know, data science, real world data on top of real world data, plus digital technologies at the service of the patients, physicians, and the entire healthcare system.
Thank you very much. That's quite remarkable. And I can also confirm that Janssen is definitely leading this field from our perspective, which is quite wide in the pharma industry. Martin, same question for you, please.
Yeah, I think the other interesting kind of dynamic that we're seeing at the moment is a fundamental shift in our portfolio. So we've moved away, or are moving away from, perhaps more traditional types of therapeutics into new areas that are either cell and gene therapies or precision medicine. And these kinds of treatments really require us to collect a different kind of evidence. So as an example of this, if you have a new cancer treatment that is reliant on a specific genetic mutation for it to be effective, then of course we have to collect data on the prevalence of that mutation in the real world, and also understand the prognostic impact of such a mutation. So, you know, having access to real world evidence there is going to be incredibly important. And if you look at cell and gene therapies, the challenge there often is it's one administration and you're done. And then you need to follow up over a long time, sometimes many years, to understand the durability of the effect. So we're kind of moving into an arena of science where real world evidence is going to be critical. It's going to be mandatory. And therefore, we absolutely have to make sure that we have the right data infrastructure. And Maria alluded to some of this. Now, when I think about our data strategy, we can essentially do three things. We can buy data, we can partner strategically with other organizations to shape, improve, and develop together evidence, or we can create it ourselves. And I think which approach we take is really dependent on what's available in the external market and what we're trying to achieve. But I think one of the exciting areas, as Maria talked about, is federated data. Often with data, the issue, of course, is it resides in a multitude of different databases. It's developed in different ways, and rightly so. Database owners are protective of their intellectual rights, their property that they've spent many years creating. The beauty of federated data is that you can create a common data model, so all of the data in all of the centers is transformed into a common set of variables, and you can interrogate the data at a federated level without it ever leaving the center. So this overcomes many of the issues in terms of data being able to talk to each other, in terms of the need to maintain intellectual property rights, and it also helps maintain patient confidentiality as well. So you can find a way to connect data across different sites, across different settings, and you can compare outcomes from different areas. You can look at treatment pathways. You can begin, as Maria said, to start thinking about innovative payment models linked to outcomes. So we're building and investing in this area with HONOR, which is our hematology federated network. And through this, I think we've proven to ourselves that we can do it, and that we can partner with many stakeholders from across the region in helping to leverage and maximize the impact of real world evidence for the good of all the partners involved.
Thank you, Martin. And just before we take some questions from the audience, can you both talk about what steps we need to take to get a resilient and sustainable healthcare system in the future? A quite complex question, I would say, right? So let's start this time with you, Martin.
Yeah, well, I think one of the big opportunities, as I mentioned earlier, is can we move more to adopting a value-based healthcare ethos within our healthcare systems? So what I mean by this is that can we take a more integrated, evidence-based approach to how we manage patients, and can we look at optimizing and rewarding healthcare systems on the basis of the outcomes that are delivered, not the activity that it delivers. And what would this look like? Well, for example, if you were thinking about say, a treatment for a particular cancer, then you would identify upfront the outcomes that you would want to achieve for the treatment of that condition. So it could be treatment rates, it could be quality of life outcomes, it could be the avoidance of unplanned adverse events. So perhaps, you know, avoidance of surgery, for example. So you define what a quality system looks like, and then you put in place the treatment pathways that can, you believe are evidence-based to deliver them, and you monitor outcomes in real time through robust real-world evidence. And as and when you start to see variation, then you can course correct as you go along. So it's about using data to inform treatment decisions in real time, in the real world. And therefore, by focusing on outcomes, I believe that we can improve patient outcomes, but do so in a sustainable way that improves quality and reduces cost. And I think there are some very good examples out there already in some areas in some countries of how value-based healthcare can deliver on all of those three objectives. I think also what we need to avoid is short-term cost-cutting mechanisms, which can happen in times of economic crisis, which I think will just damage patient outcomes. It will lead to higher costs elsewhere in the system. So we need to adopt a mindset, I think, of innovation-based investment on the basis of good evidence as a means to improve outcomes and deliver a sustainable healthcare system into the future. You know, if you look at cancer at the moment, there's reports every day of delays to treatment, fewer diagnoses, reduced tests, less access to treatment. And unfortunately, it seems likely that we're going to see the impact of all of these delays and suboptimal care translating in the future into higher death rates from certain cancers. So we need to make sure that we really do take an approach of optimizing and making care as cost effective, of course, but as beneficial for patients as we possibly can in the future. And I believe we can do that in a way that is sustainable and will actually make healthcare systems more resilient in the future. I think reliance on better data is an absolute must for us going forward.
Thank you, Martin. Maria?
Yeah, and maybe I can build on that. But by saying that, to me, I see like four main points, right, that we need to tackle or to change. So the first one for me is really shifting our mindset from sick care to well care, and that is largely based on not really only focusing on treating the illness or the disease, but preventing it. And I think in Janssen we have established a specialist R&D function about disease interception accelerated to actually shift our focus just from the product and the treatment to platforms and solutions that can focus on the prevention and real-time outcome-based care. But this is where, in my opinion, data science coupled with digital technology actually can be a major contributor to that transformational shift. The second element for me is the application of data science and a lot of what Martin has said, harnessing those data networks, artificial intelligence, and the real-world evidence to the point that he was making, to actually agreeing an objective measure of value for any given therapy, which at the end will be based on measuring the outcome rather than the trajectory to get there. And by building deeper understandings of the needs across that ecosystem and the value chain, we can actually fundamentally create personalized health experience, and you know, which at the end of the day will be beneficial for everyone. The third element, and it's maybe related to one of the trends that we see with I would say the overall situation and dynamic, where we see that there's an older population with a burden of managing what we call either long-term diseases or the lifestyle diseases. And I think the healthcare system as it is built today and with its structure, I would say, would not be able to take those challenges longer term. So I would say there is a significant strains on the system. And maybe even during COVID, we have seen that simple digital solutions like basic tracking application could help to lower that burden on the system and maybe create you know, higher quality of care for patients. And we could definitely help with some of the digital health solutions, I would say, to allow patients to take full charge of their condition and in a very highly personalized way, so that also clinicians can continue to prescribe a treatment system that goes beyond the pill, that engages effectively patients on their own care and help through symptoms monitoring. So I would say we need to start looking at how do we roll out these digital health solutions, and I'm speaking here from my lens, so that we can start collecting this data that can be part of this broader perspective or framework of real-world evidence generation, which can help definitely focus on the right thing, which is the outcome and the best treatment that we want to put the patients on, and at the end of the day, optimize the cost on the healthcare system.
Thank you, Maria. So we finished with the regular questions. In meantime, we received a lot of questions from the audience, and we would like to select some of those. And one in particular is quite interesting. It is a little bit long, but we will try to shorten it in a bit. So the question is, will the next day after the pandemic find the healthcare environment to be more digital focused than before and even now? And also, is there a way to help? So it's the same question. Also, is there a way to help those who are not so tech savvy to receive the information they need to help them in their needs?
I mean, it's you know, it's a broader question. I would say I would hope that at one moment in time in the future we could look back and say, yes, it was COVID-19 would have been a tipping point where we could learn a lot from the opportunities that we see today. And I give you one example: telemedicine during the crisis, I would say, that we have been going through has been on the rise, allowing patients and healthcare professionals to be connected. And I would say the healthcare system should monitor that carefully and closely to see whether this is the right opportunity to scale out for a specific type of patients who are stable on the medicine for follow-ups, but that can effectively drive a better outcome, better patient experience, or you know, a positive outcome, better patient experience, and at the end maybe a lower cost on the healthcare system. So I think there are examples, and we need to monitor that closely. Definitely, it takes some time to show the value, but I think we all need to be open-minded and pursue that opportunity till the end.
Thank you, Maria. Martin?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add, I think there was a part of the question about perhaps people who are less digitally savvy, and I think that's an interesting point, because if we take a truly patient-centric view of this, I think what I would hope after the pandemic is over is that maybe there will be more choice for patients in how they access healthcare. I know that here in the UK, you couldn't previously choose whether or not to have a video call with a doctor, be that a primary care physician or a specialist, unless you went privately and use one of the online doctor services. But I hope in the future that there may be, an ability to access healthcare more readily through Zoom or through other web-based technologies. But for those people who prefer human contact, perhaps the older generation who are less comfortable with technology, that we still have the ability for people to access healthcare in the right way. So I hope what we'll see is perhaps, just as we've worked with clinicians to understand their preferences for how they want to interact with pharma companies, I hope the healthcare system will also think how they can more appropriately engage patients in the future and use more flexible approaches to access care in different ways. I hope one day, if I need to speak to a GP, I don't need to take 4 hours off work and hope I can get an appointment. I hope I can maybe have a video call. So I think the pandemic should give us more choice, I think, should give us more ways and more different means of accessing healthcare. And I think that could be one of the great learnings coming out of this, if we take those learnings on board and change the way that we deliver healthcare.
Thank you, Martin. Let's move forward to the next question, since we are getting limited with time. And this is how can we support payers' external environment in setting or improving the infrastructure for remote interaction and education, which is becoming critical, with the right balance of preserving the rights to face-to-face interactions in the future? Once again, a very long question.
Yeah, was it payers, did you say? I missed that bit. Yeah.
Payers, yeah.
Well, actually, I think payers have adapted pretty quickly in most countries now. Most HTA agencies are back up and running to a pretty normal schedule now, albeit through WebExes and Zoom, etc., and holding their committee meetings through these media as well. So to our earlier discussion, I think the system has adapted incredibly quickly after perhaps an initial 3 or 4 months of some chaos and some uncertainty, I think, whilst people tried to figure out how we adapt to this new situation. But the human spirit is an amazing thing. We've adapted, and I think for me, when I think of a post-pandemic period, I guess I hope it's not going to curtail engagement between healthcare companies like ourselves and the payers. I hope the fact that we lived through this period is not somehow used as an excuse that, hey, we don't need to meet you guys anymore. I think that kind of ability to have face-to-face discussions, in-person negotiations, the ability sometimes to have an informal conversation about things is incredibly valuable, and it's very hard to do that when all of our interactions are remote, are on Zoom, are probably difficult to sometimes ensure that everyone is fully dedicated to the discussion in hand and not sort of distracted by other things happening in their day. So I think that I hope we go back to finding a way that we can continue to have a more normal dialogue with payers, because as the challenges get more difficult, if you like, with new technologies coming, with austerity challenges, I think the ability to figure this out and collaborate to work out and find a way forward has never been more important.
Thank you, Martin. Maria?
No, I would just agree with what Martin has said, and maybe he provided the view from a payer's perspective, but it's not different from a physician perspective. So I think over the last few months, we've really listened to our customers. We understood that there is a preference to, of course, like we said, to contact them through certain type of channels. That there is the restrictions of face-to-face. But what is absolutely critical for us remains is to maintain this personalized relationship with them. And I think it all goes back to addressing their needs, helping them in their practice to be able to manage their patients in the context of the crisis now, but also more generally, being able to follow their patients and put them on the right treatment. So I think not much as a big change, other than making sure that even through virtual communication, that we remain relevant, that we provide the right scientific information and education and continuous education, medical education. I think this is deemed to be very valuable. Now, on the other hand, we're absolutely missing this human touch point. I mean, it's very formal at the moment, and we have to put everything in schedule, and I think it's very different from interacting in face-to-face. At the same time, we see that there is a higher potential for virtual medical education, on-demand access to materials, on-demand access to scientific content and other type of content. So there is, I would say, a nice balance that we see between the two things. Obviously, this does not take away, like I said, and like Martin mentioned, this human face-to-face interaction. So what we hope is that when we get back to a, close to normal life, while it's going to be a little bit different from how we used to it in the past, I think we're going to see the right mix between digital and face-to-face. And if we can take the digital interactions and the face interactions to the next level of being very highly personalized, then I think the value will be highly appreciated by our customers.
Definitely agree. Let's take the best from both and make a better environment in the future. And the last question for today, which is also quite interesting, is that many of us face the challenge of digital being owned by certain teams and people working in silos. How are you both working together to overcome this? This one in particular is quite important. So, Maria, let's start this time with you.
Yeah, and absolutely, that's true. I mean, we should avoid completely falling in the trap of being in silo, and actually the cross-functional collaboration is quite important in driving into some valuable outcome of the work. And internally in Janssen, I can speak about the EMEA organization, and we work very closely with the brands, so with the TAs. Actually, our strategy, our digital strategy, is very much embedded into the TA strategy, and exactly the same for Martin and for Hemar as well. But what we try to strengthen as well is that cross-functional. So myself, Martin, and our teams are working very closely together. I would give the example of that real-world evidence space, shaping that strategy around the TA strategy, defining which are the ways that we try to collect the data or get the data, how do we analyze the data, what are we looking out of it, whether it's about digital health solutions. From the start, before we take any decisions, we need to make sure that it is actually addressing the needs at the TA level for insights generation or evidence generation. And only by doing so, we are all working towards the same objective. And only by doing that, again, we are all serving the patients and having that patient centricity as our North Star. So those are examples from my areas. And it's a very important question, and that's something that we all need to work on for sure.
Thank you, Maria. Martin? Yeah, I think Maria answered it beautifully. Maria and I work together a lot on issues such as data access, data strategy, and I think also increasingly data analytics as well, because we're both of our groups, together with, of course, medical affairs and our commercial colleagues, are all using real-world data in one way or another. Now, some of that data and the intent behind it is different, but the more we can collaborate on analytics, how we use things such as advanced analytic techniques. In my world, what can we learn from Maria's team in terms of what machine learning or artificial intelligence can do, the better. And I think that that collaboration is absolutely critical in this area, also because we also need to be all behind the same strategic objectives. And I think that's exactly what Maria was saying, that you can see in some big companies that things sometimes pop up and start and get done because they're a particular passion of an individual or a small group of people. So you get initiatives popping up left, right, and center. But actually, we're at our best when we marshal our resources, we make sure that there is a common purpose, there is a common strategy, and we align behind it. And then across all of our different functions with many diverse and industry-leading capabilities, we can really then begin to make a difference. So collaboration and a common sense of purpose, which Maria already said, for me are absolutely essential in a big organization like ours.
Definitely. Thank you, Martin, for the final words. I would like to thank you once again, both, to, of course, Maria, and to you, Martin. It was really a pleasure to host this very interesting webinar, which unfortunately became a podcast without a video, right? And really hope that we as pharma can master the connecting the digital dots like Janssen did it. We learned a lot, and we will also publish this video later on in the upcoming week or so on our YouTube channel as well. So thank you very much once again, and take very good care, and hopefully see you maybe next year in our beautiful Dubrovnik.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.